All right, I will say good morning. Let us begin. Start a moment early. This way we'll start our dedications, and by 5:45 point we can start the shir. So we begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning shir, to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Elul, Jerry and Sarah Wolaski, for dedicating all the Shumer Joshos this month in the Schusar Fushlim for their grandson, Zechariah Dov, Ben Parol Shira. To thank the Tilson and Wall families of Eretz Yisrael for dedicating all the Shumer Joshos this month in honor of the weddings of our children, and with best wishes for Ksiva V'Chasima Tova for the entire Kehillah. To thank Shindin Avram Kelman for dedicating all the Shomer Joshos this month in memory of their beloved parents and the schus of all those who need a refuah shalema. To thank Selma Wolf for dedicating all the Shomer Joshos this month with immense gratitude to Hashem, and with tefillos for health for all in the new year. To thank Leah Sol for dedicating all the Shomer Joshos this month and the schus for refuah shalema for her daughter Ilana Bas Esther, and for all those in need of Yeshuas and refuahs. To thank our Week of Learning sponsors, Hillary Jacobson Kent, for dedicating the shiurim this week in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Milton Jacobson, Mordechai Menashe Ben Dina, and our Daf Yomi sponsor for today, Gabi and Shana Cohn, for dedicating the shiur in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Gabi's grandmother, Eleanor Cohn, Elka Bas Binyamin Tzvi Zichron Librach. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshama Sav and Aliyah, all those who need a refuah, should have one together with Kol Chol Yisrael, and indeed, we should all be zocheh to a Ksiva V'Chasima Tova. Well, so with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Lamed Beis, and we are starting so far away from Lamed Beis. So we are picking up on Lamed Aleph Lamed Aleph. It's embarrassing to say it even a little bit. We're picking up 6 lines up from the bottom, but it's okay. We're going to merit Hashem. By tonight, we will be all caught up. Rabbi Chanina, remember again, we're speaking now about the length to which one must go to fulfill the mitzvah of Kibbur Avayim. The Gemara quoted the story of Dama ben Nesina, who was willing to, in his words, suffer a great loss, great financial loss, in order to be able to fulfill Kibbur Avayim. So the Gemara Rabbi Chanina says, and Dama ben Nesina is an akum. An akum doesn't have a mitzvah of Kibbur Avayim. So if an akum ultimately, again, who doesn't have the mitzvah of Kibbur Avayim, if he is able to go ahead and go to such lengths, certainly again, us as well. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yosef said as follows. He said, I'm sorry, Rabbi Chanina, Gadol mitzvah va'oseh mimi she'ena mitzvah va'oseh. Greater is the one, ultimately again, who is in a mitzvah va'oseh. So we'll say, a person who does a mitzvah because they are commanded to do so is even greater than a person who does a mitzvah who is not commanded to do so. Now, of course, this sounds a bit counterintuitive, because generally we assume that we get greater credit for doing things that we are not commanded to do than doing things that we're commanded to do. Yet Rabbi Chanina says just the opposite. It is greater to do something that you are commanded to do more than something that you are not commanded to do. Now we'll say, what's the idea behind that? Rav Yosef said as follows. Mereish Hava Amina, in the beginning I said, Man da Amar li Alacha Rabbi Yehuda, da Amar Suma Patra min HaMitzos Avidna Yom Tava l'Rabbanon, da Ha lo Mafkidna v'ha Avidna. So listen to this statement. Rav Yosef, who was blind, he said in the beginning, if someone would have told me that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that a blind person is pater from mitzvos, I would have made a yom tiv. I would have made a big celebration. Why? Because Rabbi Yossi said what that would mean is I'm pater because I'm blind, but yet I still do the mitzvos, which must mean that my schar is so incredible. So the Gemara says, Hashta disham isa lahadra am Rabbi Chanina gadol mitzvah va'oseh. Thank you. Yoser mimi she'enu mitzvah va'oseh. But now that Rabbi Chanina says that greater is the person ultimately again, Gadol mitzvah va'oseh, greater is the person ultimately who is commanded and does the mitzvah. More than the person who is not mitzvah va'oseh, Adarabba, man da amar li ein halacha Rabbi Yehuda, avidna yoma tava l'Rabbanan. I would say just the opposite. The one who would tell me that ultimately again the halacha is not like Rabbi Yehuda, meaning that again that a summa is chayiv in mitzvahs, I would make a yom tov to the Rabbanan. In other words, logic would say that someone who is not commanded to do something, but ultimately does, I'm just moving out of my way. The one who is mitzvah oseh, one who is not mitzvah, one who is not commanded to do something, but does something anyway. So often, we look at that as, wow, you're going above and beyond. But if you're commanded to do it, that's your job. So it's interesting because what the Gemara tells us is the opposite is true. And I will say this is a very simple logic. When a person is commanded to do something, for whatever the reason, the Ribono Shel Olam programmed us with a natural, instinctive reflex to buck authority. Don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me what to do. And the truth is, we have that problem even with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Deep down, the psychology, we definitely do not have time for this today. Rabbi Shmuel Silber says that deep down, the psychology of sin, why do people sin? Why do people sin? I will say, Aveira makes no sense. Chet makes no sense. Whatever pleasure you're going to get out of it is limited, temporal, fleeting, and yet the repercussions could be eternal. So why do we do it? Deep down, it's because I want to flex my muscles of self-autonomy. Don't tell me what to do. Even if you're God, don't tell me what to do. Now, when I do something of my own volition, okay, that's a choice I'm making. That's a choice I'm making. So therefore, again, interestingly enough, it's much easier to do something you're not commanded to do because you're making the conscious decision to do that than to do something you are commanded to do because something or someone else is telling you to do it. So therefore, the schar for fulfilling your actual obligations is actually greater than going ahead and doing things you're not commanded to do. It's such an incredible insight. The Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, good. So, Ki Asr Avdimi Amar, Pam Achas Haya Lavosh Sirkon. Shabbos says, so the Gemara says as follows. One time, Rav Dimi says, so Pam Achas, one time, he was wearing Sirkon Shal Zav, and Shabbos says, this still talking about Dama Ben Asina, talking about the greatness of Dama Ben Asina and his Kibbut Avaim. So Dama Ben Asina was wearing like a beautiful gold's adornment, gold accessory. Vayoshe ben Gidoli Rami, he was sitting amongst the noblemen of Rome. And what happens? His mother came, she tore it off him, she slapped him on the head, she spit in his face, and he did not go ahead and embarrass her. Did not embarrass her. So this is an incredible use. We're going to talk about this, that sometimes the greatest form of kibbut avayim is not in what we do for our parents, but it's in what we don't do to our parents. It's that sometimes even when the parent is difficult and even when the parent is overwhelming, that ultimately, again, the child does not respond in a negative way. The child is able to go ahead and maintain their composure. So again, it's interesting. So here, Dama Ben Asina didn't do anything for his mother, but rather what happened over here? He didn't respond. He maintained his composure even when she was acting crazy. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, Tani Avimi Breid Ravavo, Yesh Ma'chola Aviv Pisioni, V'tar Olam. Well, so you can have a person who goes there and feeds his father Pisione. We'll say Pisione, Rashi points out over here, is a very, like a fine type of bird. Caviar. Is caviar kosher? Caviar could be kosher, right? You could have kosher caviar, right? So you can feed your father caviar, you can feed your father, that's pisione, it's a bird. You can feed your father caviar, right? But lamaisa, do a terrible aveira, right? On the flip side, v'yesh matchinu berechayim, and yet in another case, you could cause your father to have to work the millstone, amud beis, umavir l'chay olam haba, and yet you could go to olam haba. So in other words, what the Gemara is saying is sometimes you could provide your parents with something expensive and beautiful, and yet you're doing all the wrong things, and yet sometimes you could cause your father to engage in physical labor, and yet go to Olam Haba. What's the pshat? So the Gemara says, Rabbi Avo Kigon Avimi Berej. The idea, by the way, that the Gemara is trying to highlight over here is that halacha l'maisa, so much of kibbut avayim is not just about what you do, but rather, again, it's about how you do it. Most of life is like that. So in other words, you could give your father, and again, we're saying father as father, mother, you give your father the greatest delicacy, and if you throw it at him and you say, here, this is your dinner, then that's not kibbut avayim. Conversely, sometimes, again, a child has to go ahead and have a parent do difficult things, but if the child does it with kavod and the child does it with kindness, ultimately, again, that can bring the child to Olam Haba. I will say it's a really incredible idea. I'm Rabbi Abo. Kigon Avimi Berei. So Rabbi Abo tells her, like, Avimi, my son, this is actually beautiful. Kiyim mitzvahs kibud chamisha bani samchi. Kibud mitzvahs kibud. So again, Rabbi Abo says, my son Avimi, he is mekayim mitzvah kibud avaim. Chamisha bani smicha havilei, la'avimi, b'chai aviv, v'chi hava as Rabbi Abo, kari abava, roit va'azul, pasach va'amar, in, ad dematai. So I say, this is so beautiful. Rabbi Abo said, I want to tell you the example of kibud avaim, my son Avimi. My son Avimi has 5 grown sons. Yet Rabbi Abba said, when I come over to the house and I knock on the door, my son runs to answer the door. My son runs to answer the door, and even though again my son could go ahead and send one of his sons, and he calls out, "Coming, coming, coming, coming." He says, "I'm coming to the door." That's the kibbut avei, and I will say, pretty incredible. So the Gemara says, Yom Echad, Amar le Ashkion Mayo. One day, Rabbi Avo said, I asked my son Avimi for a glass of water. So what happened? Ad Aisile Nimnam Gochin Kanalai Ad Isar Istayim Milsa. So as I said, listen to this. The Gemara says, so one time Rabbi Avo says, I wanted a glass of water. My son Avimi brought it for me. By the time he brought it for me, I dozed off. Avimi, my son, waited with the glass of water right by me, bent over, waiting to give it to me until I woke up. Incredible kibbut avayim. Now, while he was waiting, istayim milsa v'darash avimi mizmar li asaf. As my son was waiting for me, he was inspired and ultimately again came up with a beautiful insight on the pasuk. Tehillim of mizmar li asaf. Rabbi say this is the mizmar li asaf ba'u goyim b'nachal asecha. This is talking about the capital is talking about the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. So the Gemara asks, I don't understand, why does it say a song of Asaf? It's a song about destruction. The Gemara says, Kina la Asaf mi baile. And we'll say it's Avimi who says, why Mizmar li Asaf? Because when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, as tragic as it was, the Ribono Shel Olam chose to vent his fury on eitzim and avanim, on stones and wood, as opposed to on Klal Yisrael. So therefore, again, it's called Mizmar li Asaf. And I will say, when was Avimi zocha to this interpretation? When he was standing there waiting to go ahead and give his parent, give his father a glass of water. His father dozed off. He waits there and in the schus of that mitzvah of kibbut avayim, ultimately, again, he was zocha to this interpretation. I will say this harkens back to yesterday's daf, where we see the profound correlation between honoring parents and honoring HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That when you are good to your parents, ultimately in the eyes of the Ribono Shel Olam, when you're mechabed, one of the shutzfim, one of the three partners in the creation of man, it's as if you're honoring HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So I will say, I just want to point out also something very important, which is those of us who are zocha to have parents, how important it is that we serve them ourselves. A simple example, right? There's a lot of yontif coming. Persons, let's say, going to be with their parents. So again, especially if a person has children, so food's going around the table. Just a simple thing, food's going around the table. So okay, the food could get passed around, or a child could take the food directly to their parent. I'm not going to let my kids do that. I want to do that myself. I want to take the tray of food to my parent and I want to serve them. I don't want to have one of my kids do it because that's my mitzvah. That's my opportunity. And incredible, again, there's so many of these little, and that's what Avimi was doing. Avimi could have sent one of his kids to answer the door and it would have been beautiful. And the Zayda would have been happy to see his inical. But the son understood, this is my father. This is my mitzvah. This is a person who's so pivotal in my existence. Let me do it myself. Let's remember again, it's mitzvah bo yoser me b'shlucho. It's always better to do a mitzvah yourself than it is to do it through an agent. Just a little thing that we could do with all of the Yom Tovim coming up. So Gemara says, Yaakov bar Avuah le'Abaye. He going, Ana da'asina mebei Rava. Interesting case here. Yaakov bar Avuah said to Abaye the following question. When I come home from yeshiva, Abba midli likasa ve'ima mazgili. So my parents serve me. Abaye. So again, Rabbi Abba. Rabbi Yaakov bar Avuah. Rabbi Yaakov bar Avuah saying, when I come home from yeshiva, my father pours me a cup of wine, my mother dilutes it. It makes me uncomfortable that my parents serve me. But what should I do? Amrlei, me'imach kabel me'avucha los kabel. You could accept help or service from your mother. You can't accept it from your father. Why not? Your father is a big Talmid Chacham. So in addition to being your father, maybe there's room to say that as your father, he's allowed to serve you. But Lamai says a Talmid Chacham, you can't accept service from him. Incredible. Rabbi Tarfon, Havalehu Ima. Both says incredible Gemara. So Rabbi Tarfon had a mother. So apparently, again, her bed was a little bit raised off the ground. She was unable to get in. She was older, unable to get into bed herself. So what did he do? He got down on all fours and he allowed his mother to climb on his back in order to be able to get into bed. And whenever she wanted to get out of bed, he ultimately, again, he went and he bent down and he allowed her to step on him as well. Shabbos says, listen to this. Rabbi Tarfon was very proud of himself. So, and understandably so, he went to the base medrash and he was telling people about the lengths that one has to go for kibbud av ha'em. They said to him in the base medrash, Adayin lo higat lechatzi kibbud. You know what? Great job, but you haven't even passed half of the threshold for kibbud av ha'em. Zarka arneki b'fanecha liyam v'lo ech limasa. Tell me, did your mother ever take your wallet, throw it into the ocean, and you restrained yourself from saying anything to her? So as Rabbi say, once again, this goes back to the same motif we saw before. That sometimes, and Rabbi say, anyone who deals especially with aging parents understands this Gemara perfectly, which is there are times when parents test the patience of children. And there are times when parents do things and say things, and sometimes, again, there are times where a parent is acting against their own best interests. They're just not doing what they need to be doing for themselves. And it's so tempting for a child to yell, and it's so tempting for a child, sounds strange, for the child to discipline. Sometimes the greatest form of kibbud av ha'em is when you display restraint. You display restraint. You're throwing, or as we'll say, what's the example of throwing the wallet into the ocean? What does that mean? We'll say, it's like the most counterintuitive thing. It's just self-destructive behavior. Why are you taking a wallet and throwing it into the ocean? It makes no sense. Sometimes parents do things that make no sense, that are detrimental to, but yet, a child is able to go ahead and act with restraint. A child is able not to compromise the dignity. That's kibbud av ha'em. Isn't it incredible? Sometimes the greatest form of kibbud av ha'em is not what we do for our parents, but it's the ability to go ahead and maintain restraint, even when the parent is doing things that are just totally illogical or totally irrational, or sometimes even counterproductive. Rav Yosef Kavashama called Kara Di'ime, when Rav Yosef would hear the sounds of the footsteps of his mother, Amar Eiko Mikamei Shechina Dasya. I will go ahead and let me stand up because the Shechina is coming. He called his mother the Shechina, right? Because the mother is one of the Gimel that will say. But I just want to point out, it's also interesting that all these stories are about mothers and not about fathers. Right? So I don't know what the pshat with that is. The only thing I was able to think about is maybe generally women live longer than men. These bepashtos are all situations. These are all situations of elderly parents. So it could just be that they were just left with mother. I don't know what the pshat is, or just the way that it happened. But it's interesting. Am Rabbi Yochanan, Ashrei Mishaloch Haman. Both say this is a crazy Gemara. Rabbi Yochanan says, praiseworthy is the person who never met his parents. Now listen, what in the world does that mean? Look at Rashi, it's incredible. Hashem Yishloch Haman, she'i afshar lekayim kibudam or kivodam kicholat zorech v'unerash le'bosai. So Rabbi Yochanan is saying, it is impossible to honor your parents in the right way. It is impossible to be proficient in kibbud av ha'em. It is impossible not to mess up. So therefore the Gemara says, praiseworthy is the person who never met his parents. In other words, I would say, again, he's not saying it literally, he's saying it almost like halachically, that it is impossible to always fulfill the mitzvah of kibbud av ha'em. So there's a chachma to say, you know what, if you don't have parents, you don't have to throw out kibbud av ha'em. Now, again, we spoke about this yesterday a little bit, even if a person doesn't have parents, they still have the schus to be able to be mekayim kibbud av ha'em b'machshava, with thought. But l'mais, that's so strange. So Rabbi Yochanan, ki avrasi imam, Ki barto imo meis Rabbi Yochanan, when his mother became pregnant, his father died. Yaldasa meisi imo, and when in childbirth his mother died. So it's actually interesting. So Rabbi Yochanan was kind of reflecting his own life experience. He never met his parents, and as tragic as this was, he understood, at least from a halachic perspective, he never had to worry about transgressing kibbud av ha'em, which could be such a complicated mitzvah. V'chein Abaye also never met his parents. Really? Ini v'hamar Abaye amar li aim, but Abaye quoted his mother. Hahi marbenise havi. Whenever he quoted his mother, he was actually quoting a woman who raised him like a mother. Literally, marbenise is a nurse, a woman who raised him like a mother, but he never met his actual biological mother. Rabbi Asi havali ahi im zekena. So Rabbi Asi had an elderly mother. Both say this is an incredible Gemara. Amar li ba'in etachshitin. So Rabbi Asi's mother said to him, "I want jewelry." Her husband had passed away. I want jewelry. Avalah, no problem. Why don't you get your jewelry? Ba'ina Gavra. She said to her son, I want to get married. Right? Find me a shidduch. Fine, Rabbi Asi says, no problem. I will go ahead and look for a shidduch for you. Ba'ina garva d'shaper kavasach. I want someone as handsome as you. Okay, so I will say, so at this point in time, Rabbi Asi realized that he could not, it's actually, there is so much to talk about with this. I will say this Gemara is often quoted when, in Halacha L'Maisa, contemporarily, with dealing with parents with dementia and the halachic obligations of dealing with parents with dementia. Rabbi Asi felt that, again, what was happening over here was that his mother was beginning to make unreasonable requests from him, and that they were headed ultimately, again, for a conflict-ridden relationship. Shavka va'azla ardi Yisrael. Rabbi Asi left his mother, and he went to Eretz Yisrael. They were in Bava, went to Eretz Yisrael, and I will say, now the Rambam, others point out over here that clearly what must have happened over here is Rabbi Asi made healthcare arrangements for his mother and ultimately left. I will say this Gemara is the source that sometimes it is not the right thing for children to care for parents. As much as there's a mandate for a child to take care of a parent, sometimes the child taking care of the parent himself will lead to conflict, will lead to difficulties, and will lead for the child to have to go ahead and compromise kibbut ava'im. So sometimes the right thing to do is to outsource the care of a parent in a way that the parent is taken care of, the parent's needs are looked after, and it does not create a showdown conflict between parents and children. Obviously, I'm taking a very complicated scenario and reducing it to a 30-second soundbite. There's a lot more to discuss, but I will say, but just know, the problems that often we face in the caring for our parents are not new. Rabbi Asi had it also. Rabbi Asi felt, I got to make alternate arrangements for my mother because the requests are becoming unreasonable, and ultimately, again, it's going to lead to a showdown. It's going to lead to a conflict in my kibbut avayim. Fine. So what happened? Shama de ka'azla basrei. Then Rabbi Asi heard that his mother was following him to Eretz Yisrael. Okay. So what happened? Asal came to Rabbi Yochanan. So he came to Rabbi Yochanan. Amarli ma'olat es me'eretz l'chutz la'aretz. Am I allowed to leave Eretz Yisrael to go back? In other words, if my mother is following me me down to Eretz Yisrael, okay, obviously I need to go back and care for her. But am I allowed to leave Eretz Yisrael? Amar le aser. So ultimately, again, so Rabbi Yochanan told him, no, you cannot. You're not allowed to leave Eretz Yisrael. Likras ima mahu, but this is for my mother. In other words, he didn't fully, this is for my mother, right? My mother's coming after me to Eretz Yisrael. Am I allowed to leave so that she doesn't have to travel the rest of the way? Amar li, ini odea. He said, you know what, I don't know. So asrei porta, hadar asa, amar le, isi, or asi, nisratzes latzeis, hamakom yachzir chal shalom. So he waited a little bit, Rav Asi went, he waited a little bit, he went back to Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan said, listen, Asi, you want to leave, go. Nisratzes latzeis, Chodesh Baruch Hu should bring you back here in shalom. Also, Rabbi Elazar. So Rabbi Asi was concerned. Rabbi Yochanan was angry at him. Maybe he was a little bit brightest. So he went before Rabbi Elazar and he said again, do you think Rabbi Yochanan is angry at me? So Amar le chas v'shalom dilma mirsach rasach. Do you think he's upset? Amar le mai amar lecha. What did Rabbi Yochanan say to you? Amar le hamakom yachzircha l'shalom. We'll say first one line. He gave me a bracha that Chodesh Baruch Hu should bring me back to Eretz Yisrael in shalom. Amar levim isa derasach lo havim mevarich lecha. If Rabbi Yochanan was really angry at you, he would not have given you a bracha. As this all was happening, Rabbi Asi heard that his mother had passed away, and in fact, again, her aron, they were bringing her for burial in Eretz Yisrael. Amar yadi lo nafki. Had I known that my mother had passed away, I would not have left Eretz Yisrael. I will say, but an incredible. So I will say, I just want to point out, you begin to see just the spectrum of overwhelming attentiveness, right? Tanoim bending down, letting their mother walk on their back in order to get on their bed. And again, Rabbi Asi having to outsource the care of his mother in order to maintain kibbut avayim. So kibbut avayim, listen, just so you should know, I don't know if the Abarbanel brings down kibbut avayim. The pasuk says, Kabidas avicha ve'asimecha leman ya'arichun yamecha. You'll have longevity. The Abarbanel says, why does the mitzvah of kibbut avayim get longevity? Shabbos doesn't get longevity. Kashrus doesn't get longevity. So Abarbanel says, because everyone knows to be mekayim kibbut avayim in the right way will literally take years off your life. To do it the right way will absolutely take years off your life. And Chodesh Baruch Hu says, I promise you, whatever years, quote unquote, you lose by honoring your parents, I'll give it back to you. I'll give it back to you. But say it is an overwhelming mitzvah, which is why you see that there is a spectrum for the performance of that mitzvah. Let's go weiter. Person is obligated to honor his parents during their lifetime and during their death. During a lifetime, how do you honor your father or your mother? Let's say a person lives in a place where people know his father and people respect his father, and he needs something done. The son needs something done. So when the son needs something, he shouldn't go ahead and ask people for a favor in his honor. Rather, kulu b'shil abba. Rather, we'll say, what should he do? He should go ahead and have the favor done for him in the merit of his father. That's the kibud av. So, but most cases, they'll say, what about again in death? So, hava omer davar shmuel mepiv. If the son is saying something over the name of his father, lo yomer kach amar abba. Son shouldn't say, this is what my father used to say. Ella kach amar abba mari hari kaparas mishkavo. We'll say when a person quotes his father, he should say, this is what my father and my teacher, I am an atonement for his death. Right? Or an atonement for his death, his bed. Right? So in other words, we'll say, so that's how a person should quote his father. V'hanimili toch shnei masar chodesh. But we'll say that's how a person should quote his father ultimately within the first 12 months. So we'll say, remember again, so after a person dies, the longest a person goes to Gehenna, Mishpat Risham Gehenna, is 12 months. So for the first 12 months after a father passes away, whenever a son quotes his father, he should say, this is what my father, Abba Mari, Harini Kaparas Mishkavo. I am an atonement for his death. In case the father is in Gehenna, so ultimately again, the son should say, I should be an atonement for my father. Rabbi said, this is why we recite Kaddish for 11 months, not 12 months, because ultimately, again, if you recite Kaddish for 12 months, that's like the child essentially is saying, my parent is in Gehenna, they need the Kaddish the entire time. So we say Kaddish for 11 months, showing that the parent, Chas v'Shalom, was not a Rasha, doesn't need Kaddish for the entire 12 months. Only 11. So we'll say, this padeh is halacha l'maisa. So often now practice, but it's halacha l'maisa, that whenever quoting a father during the first 12 months after death, person says, these are the words of my father, Abba Mari, Harini kaparas mishkavo. Mikan ve'elech omer, zichron levracha l'chaye olam haba. After 12 months, whenever a child quotes his father, mentions his father, what does he say? Zichron levracha. Now the Gemara has a longer term. Zichron levracha should be remembered for blessing, for eternal life in the world to come. We just say Zichron levracha. So already kaparas mishkavo for first 12 months, and Zichron levracha afterwards. Tana bana chacham. So we'll say, if a chacham is quoting his father, quoting his rebbe, he doesn't say their name. In general, the person should not say the name of their father, right, or the name of their rebbe. So instead, if the chacham is quoting his father, he says, this is what my father Abba Mari, Abba Mari said, or my rebbe said. Turgaman, Torgaman, on the other hand, doesn't change the name of his father or his rebbe. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. Shem Avalo Shem Rabo. So Avud Deman. So when we say that Torgaman doesn't change the name of his father, whose father are we talking about? Ilema Avud the Torgaman. If it's the father of the Torgaman, Atu Torgaman La Barchiyu. Torgaman doesn't have an obligation to go ahead and respect his father. Ela Amarava Shem Aviv Shalchacham, the Shem Rabo Shalchacham. Rather, what it means is like this. When the Chacham, remember again, I will say, often what would happen is the Tana would give a shir, right, would say the idea, and then the Torgaman would say it over to the masses in a way that was understandable by the masses. So if the Chacham was quoting his father, he would say Abba Mari. When the Turgaman skirs it over, the Turgaman doesn't have to say Abba Mari. Rather, the Turgaman says the name of the Tana's father. Okay, so the Gemara says, Kiyad Mar Baravashi, Kiyavadarish Papirak Mar Ravashi would give shir, so Iu Amar Abba Mari, when he would quote his father, he would say Abba Mari, Va'amore Amar Hachi Amar Ravashi. But the Amora would say, right, the Turgaman would say Ravashi. Ultimately, again, the father of Mar Baravashi. Okay, good, beautiful. Tana Banan. So we'll say now we get really into the details of this. So the Gemara says, Tana Banan, Ezehu Mora, Vezu Kibud. We'll say, remember again, when it comes to parents, there are two different mitzvahs. There's kibud, there's honoring, and there's mora, reverence. So what's there in kibud and mora? Mora, Rabbi said reverence. Lo omid bimkomo, don't stand in your father's place. Lo yoshim bimkomo, don't sit in your father's chair. V'lo soser es devarav, and do not contradict your father. Incredible. V'lo machrio, and Rabbi said, don't affirm that which your father says. It's interesting. In other words, if my parent says something, child shouldn't say, you know what, I think you're right. I think you're right. In other words, that affirmation is unnecessary. My parent doesn't need my affirmation. So we'll say that's mora. So that's reverence. Kibud, how do you do kibud? Machel, mashke, you give your father to, I keep saying father, it's parents. Right? Give your parents to eat, to drink. Malbish, clothe your parents. Mechasa, machnis umotzi. It was incredible. Make sure that your parents get out of the house. Right? Again, with elderly parents, make sure your parents are not stuck in the house. Make sure they're able to get out. Which the Gemara now asks, top of Lamed Beis, Michel me. This is fascinating. Who pays for this? Right, in Kibbutz, I'm obligated to go ahead and feed my parents, clothe my parents. Who picks up the bill for this? Rabbi Huda or Mishal Bein? Rabbi Huda says it's incumbent upon the child. Rabbi Nasar or Mishal Av? Rabbi Nasar, no, it's on the father. In other words, the child is obligated to execute, but the funds comes from the father. In other words, because this is all for the father, the son doesn't have an obligation to foot the bill. Well, so obviously, this is presupposing that the father has money, right? So presupposing that the father has money, the expenses come from the father's account, the execution come from the son. So fundamental machlokas. So only Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Braid Rabbi Yirmiyah, Commander Mishalav. So we'll say ultimately again, the Rabbanon felt that the halacha really is like the one who says Mishalav, i.e. Rab Nasa Bar Oshia, that it's the father who picks up the expense. The son has the behavioral obligation, but the father picks up the expense. The Gemara says, Meser is a kasha, Ne'emar kabed es avicha ve'asimecha. Pasuk says, honor your father and mother. V'ne'emar kabed es Hashem ehoncha. The pasuk says, honor Hashem from your glory. Both say in the same way that I'm obligated to honor HaKadosh Baruch Hu even if it costs me money, so too I should be obligated to honor my parents even if it costs me money. So the Gemara says, V'i amit mishal av, my nafkale mine. But if anyway, again, the father is paying for it, I both say, so what's the big deal? In other words, if at the end of the day, the expense is borne by the father, then what's the big deal for me? Both says, it's incredible. Lebito malacha. Even if the father is picking up the bill, I will say, it still makes a very big difference to the child. Why? I will say, this is so relatable. Missed work. Missed work. Okay, it's nice that the father is the one who, in other words, that the expense comes from him. But I will say, there's another expense. You know what it's called? You know what it's called? Time, right? And maybe that's the investment that the child makes. Tashma, Beis Achim Shnei Shutzfin, if you have two brothers or two partners, Ha'avu beno, a father and a son, Harav v'tamido, a rebbe and his student, Podin ze lo ze meiser sheni. So as we actually spoke about this before, they could redeem each other's meiser sheni without the meiser sheni surcharge. Remember again, if you're podin your own meiser sheni, there's a surcharge. If you're podin someone else's, excuse me, no time for sneezing today. Let's say, so ultimately, again, if you're both someone else's Meiser Sheni, no surcharge. So we'll say, so these individuals, as much as they're related, there is no Meiser Sheni surcharge. Uma'achilin zelo ze Meiser Ani. Both say this is fascinating. You could use Meiser Ani for each other, which I will say means that a son could go ahead and use Meiser Ani to support his father. Thank you so much. Thank you. To support his father. So the Gemara is like this. I will say that's actually a really incredible idea, because what the Gemara is saying over here is you could use tzedakah money, your own tzedakah money, to support your father. Now, v'i amrit mishal bein. Now, if the obligation of kibud, the financial obligation, is upon the son, nimtza zeh parei chovo mishal aniyim. Now, I will say in general, what can you use your tzedakah money for, or like your meiser money for? It's not meiser money. You could use meiser money only for non-obligatory things. I will say, if I have meiser money, I can't use my meiser money to purchase a lulav and esrog, or meiser money to purchase a pair of tefillin, because those are obligatory. Now the Gemara is saying over here, essentially, you could use meiser money to go ahead and take care of your parents. Now, that only makes sense if what? If the obligation is not on you, right? So the Gemara says, I'm sorry. So the amrit mishal ben, if the obligation to support the parent is on the son, then the son is using tzedakah money to go ahead and support, to take care of his obligation, which would be asr. To which the Gemara says, Lo tzricha la'adafa. No. Maybe the son is obligated to provide a certain core amount, but if the father needs extras, however you define extras, maybe that's able to come from Meiser Ani. If that's the case, Hanadiktani, Allah Amr Yehuda, Tavo me'era lemishamachil es aviv Meiser Ani. A curse should come upon someone who supports his father through Meiser Ani. Vila dafa my nafkamina. But if we're only talking about additional expenses, what's wrong with that? Afilu hachi zela be milsa. They both say this is incredible. Even if you say halacha lemaisa, that the obligation to go ahead and support the father comes from the father's funds, there's just something uncomfortable about using your Meiser Ani to support your parents. There's something uncomfortable about that, of allowing my parents to be in a situation where they are eligible, so to speak, for Meiser Ani. Okay, Tashma. So I'll say, by the way, how do we paskin? We paskin, the Shulchan Aruch paskins, Mishal Av. That although the child is obligated in kibud, right, the child is obligated to go ahead and take care of the parent and provide for the parent the food, drink, clothing, getting out of the house, the expense is borne by the parents themselves. So a child is able to use parents' money to go ahead and take care of the parents, obviously presupposing the parents have the money. If the parents don't have the money, then of course the responsibility is going to be on the child. And if the parents don't have the money, then Lamais again, what funds a child is able to use. Could they use Meiser money, tzedakah money? It's all discussion in the poskim. But Lamais, for our purposes, we paskin that the expense is borne by the parents. The obligation is on the children, but financial expense borne by the parents. Tashma, Shalom Rabbi Elazar, Adheichon Kibud Av. How far does the mitzvah of Kibud Av extend? The Gemara says, I'm sorry, I got to jump the gun a little bit. We're not finished the sugi yet. So the Gemara says, he said, now even enough that if your father takes the wallet and throws it into the sea, like we said before, and the child doesn't embarrass the parent. The Amrit Mishal Av. Now if you say that ultimately again, the money to support of Kibud Av comes from the parents, so then again I will say essentially then what? If the father takes his own wallet and throws it into the sea, son doesn't get upset, it's his money, let him do with it whatever he wants. My nafkalimine, what does it matter to the child? Be baray liyarsho. But say it doesn't matter. Why? Because if the father takes money and throws it into the sea, it's coming out of my Yerusha. Coming out of my Yerusha, so it is a loss to the son. V'chihad de Rabbi Barafuna. Both listen to this story. Like Rabbi Barafuna. What listen to this? The Rabbi Barafuna. V'chihad de Rabbi Barafuna. The Rafuna, the father, kara shirai ba'anpei Rabbi Berei. Rafuna tore silk in the presence of Rabbi, his son. Rafuna tore silk. So the Gemara says, why did he do this? Amar, ichzi irasach ilorasach. I want to see if my son gets angry. So he took perfectly good silk, tore it in front of his son. I will say it was a midos test. I want to see if my son gets angry or not. So the Gemara says, but 1 second, maybe the son is going to get angry, right? Maybe Rabbah is going to get angry, and then Rav Huna, his son, placed a stumbling block. You can't set a person up for failure. So why would Rabbah tear silk, seeing if his son does get angry? And remember again, we'll say, who is his son going to get angry at? Right? The father. So now he's over on Kabed Esavicha ve'esimecha. Why would you set up such a stumbling block? No, Rabbah was mochal on his covet. So because he yielded on his covet. So they say worst case scenario, even if the son does get upset at the father, it's not an aveira. The father yielded on his covet. I v'hakav mishum bal tashchis. We'll say overlap with smichas chaver. What about bal tashchis? He's unnecessarily destroying silk. To which the Gemara says, "The aralei b'pumayni." He tore the silk on the seams, so it can be very easily repaired. Maybe Rabbah sees that. And when Rabbah sees that, he sees that it's tearing on the seams. That's why he's not going to get angry. The avalei b'shas riskei. We'll say this is wild. He tore the silk at a time when Rabbah was already angry. And he wanted to see if this would make Rabbah angry. And I will say, what's the chap? Rashi points out over here, b'shas riskei. No, sorry. Rashi doesn't say. What do you see from here? What do you see in this Gemara? That halacha when people are angry, they don't see things. They don't see things. Rabbi say this is the most dangerous element of kas. that when you get angry, anger creates life blindness. You simply don't see what is happening around you, which is why your responses are often uninformed and destructive. So he tears it on the seams, but he knows his son is not going to see it. Why? Because he's already angry. And once you're angry already, Rabbi say you don't see the realities of life around you. What a profound idea. Masni Rabbi Cheskel Rami Brei. Rabbi Cheskel said to Rami, his son, Hanisrafim kiniskalin. We'll see an interesting case over here. Let's say you have a group of people. Some of them are subject to sreifa, right? All of them are subject to a death penalty, but they're subject to different death penalties. Hanisrafim biniskalim. So some of them are subject to sreifa. Some of them are subject to skila. Now, both say sreifa is considered to be a more chamer form of death. Rabbi Shimon Omer Yaduna b'skila. All of them are put to death by skila. Shasreifa chamura. Because we'll say again, when in doubt about a death penalty, you have to go with the more lenient one. So therefore, again, because we don't know who is, so I will say, it's not like you go over to the group and say, all right, guys, raise your hands if you're subject to sreifa, right? Let's see the sreifa chevra, the skila chevra, right? But Pashas, no one's volunteering this information, or maybe they don't know. So therefore, he put to death the whole group through skila. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Berei Abba lo tisni hachi. So listen to this. So Rabbi Yehuda said. So now remember, this is Rabbi Cheskel. Rabbi Cheskel was saying as follows, right? No, Rabbi Shimon was saying as follows, sorry. So what happened? So Rabbi Huda said to his father, no, father, don't teach it that way. My irya sreifa chamura. Why are you saying because sreifa is chamer? Tefok le droben eskalim. Say because it's rove. The majority of people are put to death by skila. Elahachi isniye. Rather, here's how you have to teach it. Haniskalim bin nisrafim. If you have a group of people, niskalim get mixed up with nisrafim. Amarle ihachi ema seif cham amiyadon misreifa. The chum say, everybody should be put to death by sreifa. Why? Shaskila chamura. Because skila is chamer. My area, the skila chamura. Why do you have to bring down the skila more chamer? Tefak le'diruba nisrafim. Just say the majority are subject to sreifa. Amrle hasam rabbanon who dekamr le Rabbi Shimon dekamr sreifa chamura lo skila chamura. Both say there's a more fundamental machlokes happening over here about what's a more stringent form of death penalty, skila or sreifa. Skila or sreifa. Now both say why is this whole exchange here? Amrle Shmuel Rabbi Yehuda shinina lo tema le lavucha hachi. Shmuel said to Rabbi Yehuda, do not talk to your father that way. Shmuel said to his father, Father, you're incorrect. You're incorrect. So Shmuel says, Rabbi Yehuda, do not talk to your father that way. Tanya, hari shahaya aviv over al divrei Torah. If his son saw that his father was in violation of words of Torah, al yomer lo abba avart al divrei Torah. He shouldn't say, Father, you're in violation of divrei Torah. Ela omer lo abba kach kasuv batorah. Son should say to his father, Father, this is what it says in the Torah. So the Gemara says, kach kasuv batorah. That's even worse. It's even worse. Ela omer lo abba mikra kasuv batorah. It will say if a son sees his father doing something wrong, he should simply say to his father, Father, I believe that there is a pasuk written in the Torah. He should just quote the pasuk, and the father will understand on his own, ultimately, again, that he made a mistake. Otherwise, we'll stop over here for tonight. Again, shir tonight, Emirat Hashem, at 7 o'clock p.m. We are going to cover the rest of this daf at Emirat Hashem Friday's daf as well, because Slichos start early tomorrow. 7 o'clock tonight, Emirat Hashem in the base medrash. It's going to be special, beautiful, wonderful, special Erev Rosh Hashanah Limud. I will say, Shkoyach.
Yomi Shir was saying everything's around 2-3. I see this before WhatsApp chat.
Oh, that's right, last week's. Okay, it's going to be.
I can send a correction. I just
then it's going to be down here. It's going to be down here, Meretz Hashem.
In the past, we've started at 5:40.